My name's Iestyn, George, and his name is John Peel, as you probably already know. We don't really know why we're here, other than to talk and interview Peel, and also we'll ask you to ask some questions.
Can I ask a question?
You can.
Is there anybody here from Radio Mafia in Finland? Sure. Is that you, seriously? Are you just... Oh, was it you that left the parcel for me at the hotel desk? Thank you very much. The T-shirt will fit wonderfully. The condoms, I'm afraid, I don't really need, but I'm very grateful to you for imagining that I might need them. Okay, I'm glad I cleared that up. Okay.
Any more parcels that need to be left? Are you at the Angel, John?
Yeah.
Or? There you are. Stalkers are very, very welcome.
Bloke with a chainsaw.
You're not actually, you're normally the one doing the interviews at these One Live events, aren't you? Why are you not doing it today?
Well, funnily enough, I'm not, because I've always been a really crap interviewer. And because once I've gone beyond when does the new album come out and when does the tour start, I can never think of questions to ask people. And I've got a cassette at home of an interview I did with Captain Beefheart, who's one of my great heroes. And it is a simply appalling interview. And every time I start thinking, perhaps I can get into this interviewing lark, I listen to that again, and it stops me from doing it. Because I'd much rather, to be honest, rather than have an interview on the programme. I know bass players are fascinating and have some terrifically interesting reflections on life and so on, but I'd much rather just play another record, to be honest. So that's why we don't have interviews on our programme. Just keep the hits happening.
We talked a bit about heroes earlier on, and you were saying how bizarre you find that not necessarily the recognition of, oh, look, it's you, but the fact that people hold you in some great esteem.
Well, I think that the thing is that you can, because I've been doing the same job for over 30 years, you can either, depending on your perspective, see this as like selfless devotion to the cause of public service broadcasting, or you can see it as an indication of a shocking lack of ambition. And it's both of those things, really. From the age of about 27, I've been doing exactly what I wanted to do in life. I've never had really wanted to get into television, and I've never been much good at it when I've had a go anyway. I don't want to write novels, and I don't want to be in films and things. I just like doing what I do, so it's not a problem for me. It is. You occasionally get people coming up and who kind of misunderstand your function and think you're a kind of showbiz person and that you'll know lots of top showbiz people, but thank God I don't. And we live miles out in the country, and on the rare occasions when showbiz people turn up out of the blue, Bruno Brooks is not a major showbiz figure, I appreciate, but has been in the papers recently for knocking Anthea Turner about, and you may have, different. I don't know what your opinions on that are. I'm not going to canvass them here and now, but he turned up once, and he was driving a car which cost 8 times what our house had cost us. And when he arrived in the driveway unbidden, it's one of those things. Do we go out and say, "Hello, Bruno, it's great to see you," or do we set the dogs on him? And I think perhaps, unfortunately, we opted for the more sociable approach.
Does he still sport that mullet that he used to have in the 80s?
I'm happy to say I've not seen him for many years, but he very likely does, yes.
Why would Bruno Brooks come and see you?
Well, I don't know. I think he had a gig. He was doing a gig in the area or something, and he felt we'd be delighted to see him. But it's one of those strange things, because people always assume that we know loads and loads of people in showbiz, but in fact we don't. So I'm always terrifically excited when I meet. I mean, I was talking earlier on to Mellis, and I played a lot of their records, and they've been on the programme more than once, and they were showing me baby pictures, and I thought that's good. I like it if you can have that sort of relationship. I don't want to be awestruck by people, but just kind of normal human contact, I think, is ideal.
But like you said, you have on occasion. I mean, have you had any musical heroes that you've either come across or just?
Well, I suppose Beefheart and Marquis Smith would be the top man. Marquis Smith, as we were saying earlier, you should have heard our conversation earlier on. It was fantastic.
It was much better than
really
this.
Interesting. But there's nothing that says the people who do good work are going to be nice people. And, I'm sure someone like Picasso is probably a complete arsehole, but it doesn't diminish from the work that he did at all. And Marquis Smith is strange guy. I mean, and quite often a pissed bloke as well. In fact, the last time I saw him was with, or second to last time I saw him, I was with my son William, and he completely ignored me and spent his whole time giggling and telling William things that William had got to say to me. It's a very strange kind of 10 minutes or so. But when I've met him, I really don't know what to say to him, because I mean, if The Fall made a bad record, I wouldn't know, because anything they do is fine by me. And so we just sort of punch each other on the shoulder in a manly way and go our separate ways. And Beefheart occasionally phones me up out of the blue, and I dread having somebody say, "Dad, it's Captain Beefheart on the phone," because although I'm awestruck that it is him phoning, I can never think what to say to him, and I have those awful kind of stilted conversations.
Do you call him Captain?
I call him Don. I'm that intimate with him. But he always finishes his conversations with a bit of advice for my children, and his piece of advice, not this year, actually last year, he said, "Tell your children only to swim in water that people have pissed in." And you can make of that what you will. I don't know. It's something to do with sharks, I believe, but I don't know.
But sporting heroes, you said you also sort of have more dedicated sporting heroes.
Yes, yeah. There's Kenny Dalglish remains a great hero, despite the fact that he plays golf. I always see golf as the beginning of the end, really. When people... you don't play golf, do you, Iestyn?
I do.
Well,
yeah.
there you go. In that case, there's another one
Badly,
gone. Another one off the Christmas card list. But it always seems to me to be, when people come to me and say, "I've just taken up golf," it's like I have entered the antechamber to death. And
Iggy Pop?
does he play golf?
Yeah,
I'm not surprised to hear that. Never been a fan. But how did I get on to golf? Sorry. Oh, sporting heroes. But Kenny Dalglish, I met bumped into him in the reception in a hotel in Liverpool, and he's really a nice bloke, very funny actually, because he's got a reputation for being a bit dour and miserable. But actually, a most amusing guy. But most of the time, it's a good idea to stay clear of your heroes, because they're often very disappointing.
We obviously were supposed to talk about music all day, but you insisted.
I don't know. Well, I don't know anything about the record industry. I know Lamo is really clued up on the record industry, but I don't have anything to do with it. And the last time I was in a record company office was about 25 years ago. So
we'll stick to your strengths then. And do you want to name your all-time Liverpool 11?
Difficult. That would be very difficult. Oh, if somebody applauds. Good Lord. I'd have to think about that. But obviously Dalglish would be in it. And
remember, you're in Wales now, so you have to at least mention
Ian Rush. And possibly... Joey Jones, too, is another great hero. I haven't really thought about positions. Billy Liddell would obviously be in it.
Tommy Smith or not?
Yeah, Tommy Smith, because he was one. Because I used to love that people always used to say, "Oh, he's really slow," but you didn't get past him, nevertheless, And I'm sorry to see the terrible state that he's in now. He can hardly walk, poor fella. But I'd need to sit down with pencil and paper to work out a coherent team.
Yeah. Right.
Sorry if I spoiled the whole...
I was expecting at least 25 minutes out of that one.
Oh, sorry.
Do you want to tell your life story? I mean, is that just born and raised?
Well, that's kind of born at the age of 4 in a woodcutter's cottage.
That's the one, yeah. What was your first musical memory?
Well, actually, the very first one was going to the... at the end of the war, they had these... that's the Second World War. Well, I say that because I'm not a dancing man, as I wish I was. My wife is an exuberant and enthusiastic, rather spectacular dancer. And whenever we go anywhere, whether it's dancing, there's always a kind of... a kind of slight coolness between us. And she goes off, and I'm always left sitting with somebody else's wife or girlfriend who wants to dance, but can't because it's her time to be lumbered with me. And I always tell them, I say, "I'm sorry I can't dance." I say, "I'd love to be able to, but it's Korean War, shrapnel in the knee. I don't like to talk about it." And then they'll say, "Oh, sorry, I wish I hadn't mentioned it now." And so on. But of course, I was 11 when the Korean War ended, in fact, and there's no shrapnel in there at all. Yes, I was born... 3 days before the war broke out, so I'm hoping that I shall end up if I live long enough, to be the only person left alive who was born before the Second World War. The way I'm going, though, I don't think I'm likely to make it. But the first music I ever heard was played by the band at a circus in Birkenhead in about 1945. And they played a tune called the Post-Horn Gallop. So it's not a very hip selection, I have to say. But I like the first record I ever bought was Blue Tango by Ray Martin and his concert orchestra. And the first live, that's not a very hip choice either, by the way, but you can probably tell that. And the first live gig I went to, if it's for me, I'm in the bath, by the way. The first live gig I went to was there was a record called The Happy Wanderer, Die Fröhliche Wanderer, I think, and which was in the charts for a whole year. The first time a record was ever it was a sheet music chart, actually. It was the first time that anything was in the chart for that length of time. And the Open Kirchen Children's Choir had the big version of that, and they did a gig at the stadium in Liverpool, and my mum took me to it. So that was the first gig I ever went to, and that wasn't cool either, I'm afraid.
Where did you start getting cool then?
Well, God, still hoping that I will. I went to see people like Frankie Lane and Johnny Ray, who were the big stars of the 50s. Now almost forgotten, really, but quite interesting figures in their own way. But I was appalled when I went to see Frankie Lane, because he was like my absolute hero. I could still, if given a lot of drink, sing you virtually the entire Frankie Lane songbook.
More red wine, please.
I don't think you'd enjoy it at all. But I went to see him and was shocked to see that, first of all, he was about 30, which, because I'd imagined that he was a much younger bloke. And he had a kind of rather nasty, pale blue shot silk suit on, which I didn't think was right at all. So I then started looking around for something else, and obviously around that time Elvis happened, and it's one of those things which you can't imagine now, because you've all obviously grown up with pop music of one sort or another being banged into your heads, probably too more than is good for you. But hearing Elvis come out of your radio when you were like 14 was it's like it really was Saul on the road to Damascus time. It was an epiphany, as it's fashionable to say now. It was. I just sort of stood and looked at the radio, and I thought, I can't believe that anything as elemental and as raw as this is allowed to exist. And then a few weeks later, I heard Little Richard on the American Forces Network radio, and again, it was another life-transforming experience, because it's like, it's almost like seeing people having it off or something. Do you know what I mean? It's just so kind of startling. Not that I ever have. The live sex shows are not for me. But it was just so startling and alarming and rather frightening. And it was a sort of similar thing when I first heard the Ramones, really, in the punk thing. It was a kind of it was an echo of that, anyway.
Does that still happen obviously to a lesser degrry, but does
I still get records coming in, that I put them on. And my first reaction is I can't wait to get on the radio on Tuesday night, whatever night it is, and play it, because I like the idea that people can have the same sort of reaction to records that I had. I always use this as an example because it was just perfect. I used to, when I lived in the States, I lived in Dallas for 4 years, and I used to go with some mates of mine down to New Orleans. This was before we knew about sexism and stuff. And to follow the fortunes of a young woman who was called Chris Colt, the girl with the 45s, and who was a stripper, as you might imagine. And we'd go into these strip clubs, and you'd get a very much watered-down drink as part of the cover charge. And then you'd sit her, watch her do her act, and then follow her to the next venue. She was a fascinating performer. And after I'd seen 3 or 4 of her shows, I got a bit bored and decided to drive home, and I left my mates in New Orleans, and I was driving back, and there's a part of, in East Texas, there's this whole area. They always say, as you'll know if you're Welsh, that it was the size of Wales. Wales is always used as a kind of measurement by people who write it. It's either the size of Wales, or if it's a little bigger, I think bigger, the size of Belgium. It's always Wales or Belgium. Anyway, so the piney woods of East Texas probably covered an area the size of Wales. And I was driving through there, and it was about 3 o'clock in the morning, and there's just a concrete road, a ribbon, a silver ribbon, because the moon was at the far end of it. It was very beautiful, and with these pine woods on either side. And you know how it is in the States, any accumulation of more than 1 or 2 houses is a town. The concept of the village is unknown. So everything is a town. And I was just coming up over this ridge, and I was listening to what's his name? The chap who's Wolfman Jack on the radio, who was just a great DJ. There haven't been many great DJs, but he was one of them. And he played Elmore James' Stranger Blues. And it just fitted perfectly. I'd never heard it before. It's got a fantastic guitar solo on it, very repetitive. I always like very repetitive guitar solos. And I came up over this ridge, and there's one of these little towns, just a couple of lights on in the valley. And as they came on, the first line is, "I'm a stranger here, I just drove in your town." And I thought, this is just such a perfect conjunction of music and place and mood and everything. And so if somebody has that kind of experience, it's a lot to hope for. But, if somebody has that sort of an experience every once in a while whilst listening to the programmes that I do, then that's justification enough for them, I think.
I mean, do you get would you say that you get a spark every week, or that?
Well, most weeks, there's always something that
because you don't appear to sell, you don't appear to be particularly evangelical about records. You don't sit there and go, right, everybody, sit down and listen to this.
Well, no. I mean, the fact that I'm playing it at all, it's just like putting them out there for people to make their own mind up about. As I say, I'm in the fortunate position working for the BBC where I don't have to worry about whether it's going to be popular or not, or whether people are going to want to buy it or not. So I just think it's worth playing.
Has that ever been something that you've concerned yourself with?
No, not really, to be honest. No. I mean, it's once the BBC. I mean, obviously, I've got a lot of things that are criticisms to the level of the BBC. Always have had, probably always will have. But the one thing that I have certainly applied to the programmes I do is that once they established that you kind of vaguely knew what you were doing and that there were people who quite liked it, they do leave you alone to get on with it. And it is genuinely true that in 33 years of doing programmes from Radio 1, I have never had a single member of the management team make any suggestions about what I should and should not play. And I don't think you'd get that kind of freedom anywhere
It didn't
else.
appear to be at points during the 80s and 90s that they were fanning around with your show, and certainly they appear to be not able to fit you into a format or whatever such people do.
Well, there was a period when I was moved to the weekends.
Because everybody, I mean, certainly I thought at the time, oh, here we go, he's off now.
No, it was...
It's only a matter of time.
It was genuinely at my request. The BBC always gives you the option of pretending that you're doing it in order to further your television career or something. So they let you walk rather than push you. But I did, because the thing was I was doing 90 minutes a night, 4 nights a week, and I lived 2 hours drive out of London. And so I was spending, you work it out, at 4 times 16 hours a week rather, in the car. And I was getting really knackered and really hating it. And I had 4 quite young children at the time. Still got them, I was a bit older. Right. Last time anyway. I would have to leave for London about the time they got home from school. So, and of course, kids, because some of you will have been children, and you'll know that, frankly, you don't really pay much attention to what your parents do, and you certainly don't want them asking you how you got on at school. But on the other hand, as a parent, you feel you've got to talk to them about something, and that seems to be as good a thing as any. So I'd wait until they came home. I'd say, "How did you get on at school?" And they'd just rush past you and into their rooms, and then I'd drive off into London feeling rather forlorn, and I'd get back again at 2 o'clock in the morning, and I'd get up in the morning before they went to school, so I could be a kind of grumpy presence slumped on the kitchen table, but it just getting ridiculous, So I thought, well, instead of having 4 90-minute programmes, could I have 2 3-hour programmes, which really did condemn me to the weekends, but it meant that I'd spent more time with my family. It's another one of those traditional excuses.
I mean, do you, with people like Lemack and Wiley turning up halfway through the 90s, did you feel threatened at all by their presence?
No, not at all, because obviously they do very different programmes, the ones that I do. I mean, they're not... Occasionally you get accused of being kind of willfully obscure, and so I'm trying to be cute, but frankly, I gave up trying to be cute a long time ago, obviously. And I'm always quite grateful because there have been times. It's difficult to imagine what Radio 1 was like when it first started, because I think that the BBC just saw it as a fairly temporary measure, and then they could just let it die, and they'd get back to doing what they did so fantastically well before. It certainly was a radio station much hedged about with strange and pettifogging regulations. There were things like you only had, I forget how many hours it was, but say like 8 hours a day of what was called needle time, which always sounded like some kind of drug thing at the time. But it just meant the amount of time you were allowed to devote each day to playing records, and the rest of it had to be made up with what was called live music. Now, there are three conditions of live... Well, I'm gone already. The three conditions... Start losing. It's an awful thing to do, that, isn't it? Because you just probably got to change your bag or something. I know what it's like, what was I saying?
Doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. It's gone completely. But in the early days of Radio 1, you had this live music. Now, there are three types of live, as I was explaining to you earlier. There's live, which means that it was once live. There's live, which means that it was recently live. And then there's live, which means it really is live. And as with our programmes this week...
They're closing in on you, John.
Where's the security button? I was told there was one. I can't find it. So like some of the programmes we're doing this week, the top of the bills will be live, because they'll be on at the same time we're on the radio. But the other ones are only live, in that we're recording them before, because obviously I'm not on the air then. So that's an example of how it works. But we used to have people like, you'd get the Northern Dance Orchestra would do cover versions of hits of the day, and with the band singers singing, if there was singing to be done. And I have this...
Do you play these records?
Not in my programme, but in the daytime programme, so you'd get something. And the best one was when I heard when Purple Haze was in the charts, and it was the Northern Dance Orchestra doing Purple Haze, which was obviously with the guitar player. I thought, well, I don't know how to do what this black chap's doing. So his attitude was obviously, he did something which sounded like somebody throwing an electric guitar and amplification down a lift shaft. And it was just priceless. And then at night you'd get another big favourite was, in order to fill in the time, I used to get the Radio Dance Orchestra of Baden-Baden as part of some European exchange thing. So anybody arriving in Britain, from another planet, would switch on the radio and think the Radio Dance Orchestra of Baden-Baden were a pretty big business because they were on every single night, So it was a strange place to work. I've forgotten why I got onto all of that, sorry. That's one of the things that happens to you. I was saying to Iestyn just before we came down, that from the age of 19, I read this in Reader's Digest, so it must be right, from the age of 19, your willy starts to get smaller. That'll only affect a few of you, obviously. But you start to lose brain cells. And I don't think I've got an awful lot left. So I do occasionally start on topics and then forget what it is I'm talking about.
Well,
and you will do the same, let me tell you. You'll sit there being smug and young and attractive, but it'll happen to you.
I mean... was it a chummy place to work at, Radio 1, then?
Not in the slightest. It was an awful place to work.
So tell us who... Yeah, spill the beans.
Well, the thing is that, a lot of the DJs I really didn't know, because obviously they, if you're a bus driver, you don't know all of the other bus drivers in the garage. And we worked different shifts. So some of the bastards I never saw at all, But it was a job that, we were encouraged to believe that this was so, that it was a device that you could use to procure a very remunerative outside living. And everybody who started on it, first of all, it was a disadvantage to like music, and we genuinely were told that, because they felt that somehow this would make you liable to being corrupted by the music industry. Sinister men would be offering you money to play records and things, which has, to be honest with you, never happened even in the States, where I was kind of hoping it would happen, but it never did.
Does that mean that when, let's say, a plugger comes up to you in the bowels of Radio 1 now that you just send them scuttling, or...?
Well, they never bother to speak to me, though. Because
you have some sort of powerful force field that makes...
No, not at all. They just know that they know that getting a record played on Joe Wiley's programme is worth about 100 plays on my programme. So they're polite enough, ask me if I'm Bob Harris. That's the thing that happens to me a lot, actually. It's taxi drivers. Always, if I get into a taxi, it's used to love you on the whistle test. They say, no, that's Bob. No, mate, come on. They get quite stroppy with you. I say, no, it wasn't me. I didn't do it. I never did it. And some Scottish bloke in a pub in North London last year got really quite aggressive when I refused to accept that I was Bob Harris. And as I'm not much of a fighter, I eventually said, OK, I'm Bob Harris. It's easier that way.
Because if I read on a website recently that it said that the only two people that didn't like you or you'd had spats with, one was Simon Bates, certainly. And was there a public falling out between you and Simon Bates?
Well, I'll tell you how it was. We used to have this event, the Radio 1 DJ Christmas Party. And the name of it is enough to make any sensitive person filled with a nameless dread. And it would be done in October. And we were all taken into this big dining area in the broadcasting house, and the first thing everybody would do would rush to see the seating plan. And you knew why everybody, because everybody would say, please don't let me be anywhere near Bates. And if they found that they were, they'd go to whoever had organised and said, please, can I go anywhere else? And that was the first thing that happened when you got in there. Then you'd have photographs taken, and you'd have like 10 minutes devoted to photography. And I'd say to them, why do we go through this shit year after year? Because none of these photographs ever appeared anywhere, and yet every year we'd have all these photos taken. And then you'd sit down, and it went on for like 3 or 4 hours, because it was usually either the hairy monster, most appropriately named man, or nicknamed man, or Mike Reed, who was in charge of it, and he would interview each one of us in turn. And because I was...
This was for the pleasure of the listeners, presumably.
This was for the delight of the listeners on Christmas Day, yeah. And because there was an extraordinary time when I was the only Radio 1 DJ who was married, who wasn't married to a European airline hostess. Because there were only 4 of us that were married. Paul Burnett was married to a woman from Luxembourg who'd been an airline hostess, stewardess, rather. Kid Jensen's wife was Icelandic stewardess. And who was the other one who was married? Dave Lee Travis was married to a Swedish airline stewardess. Sheila was a school teacher. And we used to... They had, on the 10th or 15th anniversary, we had a grotesque evening in the house of the then controller of Radio 1. And Sheila and I, because I like to get on with people, I really do. And I said to her before we went, there's a lot of do we have to go? Can we feign illness? And I thought, no, we really ought to go. And so we went in, and I said to her, you get in, and all the blokes will be standing at one side. It's like when you go to parties, it'll happen to you when you're older. You find you go to parties, all the blokes are in the kitchen talking about loft insulation. And I said, but all the women will be standing talking. I said, go and join the other women, do your best to be kind of one of the gang. And so she went off and did that, and after about 10 minutes, there's a tug at my sleeve, she's quite small, there's a little tug like this, and I said, what's the matter, why have you left her? And she said, when I joined them, they were talking about hairspray. They're still talking about hairspray. So that was what the thing we had to contend with. So I was called up to talk to Mike Reed, because I think I might have also been the only Radio 1 DJ with issue, as they say, who'd got children at the time. And so I always had to do the kind of family moment, which is important in Christmas. So what are you going to do? And I said, well, going to stay at home with the children. And then what's your favourite record? And I said, Teenage Kicks. And they played Teenage Kicks every Christmas. But the events were truly terrible. And at one of them, Paul Burnett and Kid Jensen, who were like really funny people, especially together because they'd worked at Radio Luxembourg together, had some great stories to tell. And we just got more and more wrecked and more bored. And Bates was at his most obnoxious. And we actually did go and wait in the underground car park with the intention of beating him senseless. And fortunately for us, because we're not really scrappers, and Bates was quite strong, he didn't turn up, so it never came to anything.
Oh dear. There's another one that I'm constantly surprised at, the notion of you sharing Breaking Bread with the likes of Nick Ross and people like that. There's this sort of secretive BBC gathering of people.
Oh, yes, because I used to get invited to loads. I've always been invited to loads of heavy-duty BBC events.
It needs explanation, really. So
well, I think the reason was because that I'm a public school boy, and that's always counted for a lot.
Essentially, they seem to gather a group of randomly selected people to dine with very important people at the BBC on certain occasions.
I mean, I went to one. I went to one of the TV centre once, and it's like going to Madame Tussauds, except all the exhibits were live. Because you knew everybody in the room, but you didn't know any of them. And so I was sitting opposite a chap who does the wildlife programmes.
Attenborough.
That's the one. And I've got the two Ronnies, one Ronnie there, another Ronnie there. And, it's all because they all know each other, and they all stay at each other's houses. So it's all right. Look, in January, you must come and visit us. And they're at the house, they all live in houses that are called things like blinkers and stuff like that. You must come and visit us at Blinkers. And, oh, yes, we'd love to. We had such fun last time. And you're sitting there and you're thinking, I don't know who you are. I don't know where Blinkers is. And are you going to invite me to Blinkers? They never do. I've never been to Blinkers in all of my life. And they're really, you just feel incredibly isolated. And you sit there trying to, look as though you're kind of thinking about something deep.
Do they want to know?
No, they don't speak to you at all. You just sit there. I was very lucky, actually, because Manny used to live near Fishguard, who was the first journalist to cross the Rhine at the end of the Second World War. What was his name? Everybody knows that. I'll be really impressed. Double-barrel name. But he was a lovely man. He actually talked to me about me, which people of that generation are rather prone to doing, because they don't just have this sort of obsessive interest in themselves. So here I was sitting here for an hour talking about myself. I'm a different generation.
Because, I think Marianne Hobbs mentioned the story that.
Oh, because that was extraordinary. Because we got Jeremy Paxman there, and we'd got the head of BBC News, somebody Hall there, and I'd got the man who did that what was seen as a rather pretentious series on art for BBC Two last year, I think, sitting there, and then John Burt, Terry Wogan here, John Burt there, Nick Ross there, and then Moira Stewart over there. We don't get together very often, I have to be honest. And a couple of other kind of notable people. And
Marianne said, and you warned Marianne that if you should fall asleep at any point during the evening's conversation, that she should kick you very hard.
No, I said. I told her I did give her some fatherly advice because I'm in a position to do so. I said, don't say anything, because she does tend to be rather outspoken, and I thought she could make life quite complicated for herself. So she took my advice, thank God. But it's one of those things where I thought we were going to just get pissed, and I was quite looking forward to having a bit of chat with Jeremy Paxman and people, and Terry Wogan who's here. That's Terry. He's actually a very funny bloke and very political, and so I quite enjoyed talking to him. So, but they came round with the starters, and then when we'd finished the starters, John Burt raps on the table and says, I've asked you here so we have an exchange of ideas and things. You think, well, I haven't got any, so how do I fit into this? And then we were supposed to be talking about the future of the BBC and who was going to do what and how they felt things should work. And Nick Ross, let me tell you, is most of you will have probably been to school and will be familiar with the type of kid, or a university probably happens as well, the kind of kid who gets up and asks questions to which he already knows the answer in order to impress the teachers, And that's Nick Ross. That's exactly what he did. And he stood there and he asked all of these questions, made these long speeches about the internal structure and workings, inner workings of the BBC, which, frankly, nobody gave a toss about. And, but he was just trying to impress. So if he ever turns up as Director General, I wouldn't be at all surprised, because I think that's what he had in mind. But I get invited to a lot of those things, and you can't really say no. Sometimes they're okay, and sometimes, at one of them, I ended up, you'll be impressed by this, I did a lot of royalists in the house, I can tell. Ended up talking to Princess Margaret for about half an hour, which was quite interesting.
About what?
about the two things that she's really proud of that she's done in her life. Because one of I always hoped that if I ever did meet any of them, because I'd get rid of them all tomorrow if I had the chance to do so, but not kill them, but just stop paying for them. Really, that's what I'd like to do. So no more money for those bastards. And I always hoped that if I ever did meet them, I wouldn't do all the kind of calling them Your Holiness, whatever it is you're supposed to call them. And so I didn't, I just spoke to her as one human being to another. And there was something, I said, actually, you and I have got something unexpected in common. And she looked slightly puzzled, as well she might, And I said, we've both been on the Archers as ourselves. And at that time, there were only 4 people who had been on the Archers as themselves. It was me, her, Lucinda Pryor-Palmer, or the horsewoman, as she's always described, and the Duke of Westminster, another ill-assorted group of people, I have to say. And so she was apparently inordinately proud of having been on the Archers. And the other thing that I talked to her about was her dad, who was King George VI, who I admired enormously as a man at that time because he had overcome incredible stammer. And there's one of the most moving recordings I've ever heard is his Christmas speech to the nation in 1940, I think, which is got this. There's a verse, he reads a poem about a man who stood at the gate of the year, and you can hear him fighting against the stammer. And of course, it was the blackest days of the war. So, set in that context, it's so those were the things that she liked talking about, were her dad and the Archers. So I hit the right buttons.
Fantastic.
She's not been in touch since.
No. Not down to feed the chickens. A few little general questions, and then we'll sort of open things to the floor. Whatever happened to the Peel sessions? The records, the releases, that is.
Well, I don't really know, to be honest with you, because I had nothing to. People always assume that I derive vast sources, great sums of money from all of that, and it wouldn't have been, because I had nothing to do with them beyond having my name on them. I mean, I didn't produce them or write any of the songs or do anything. So when they first started, it was 25 years. I mean, I've been suggesting to the BBC that they ought to put out some of these sessions because they had the rights to them. And they were rather shocked in the early days at the thought of making money, because this was something which was very much counter to the BBC's general policy. They thought it was rather vulgar to make money. So they're quite happy to put out LPs as they did. There were 2 LPs which I should love to have. One was an LP on rose growing, advice to people on growing roses, and another one was Great Wimbledon Champions Between the Wars. And what was on that, I don't know, just the sound of tennis balls. I have no idea. But so when I said that they could actually put these records out by quite popular pop groups, they might make some money. Slightly shocked at that. So eventually I went to talk to Richard Branson about it, and he wasn't interested. So eventually the bloke who in effect is the husband of my agent, and she doesn't do anybody else, she just does me. I've been a sort of hobby for 25 years. And so he decided to do it. And so initially I was kind of consulted about which ones were to be released, and sometimes they'd do as I suggested. Most of the time they would ignore me, and then they eventually got fed up with doing it, because it did involve an amazing amount of work, because a lot of the groups, the records I wanted to release, the groups would have broken up. 2 of them would have gone to live in New Zealand, and if 2 people agreed to the re-release, the other 2, because they hated them so much, would not. So it was a nightmare, and they had to all rejoin the musicians' union as well. It all got it was incredibly complicated, and Clive, my agent's husband, just got fed up with it and stopped doing it and sold the rights on to somebody else. And then since then, I don't even know what's coming out. So when the records arrive, if they do, it's as much a surprise to me as it is to anybody else.
Why haven't there been any books either written by you or about you?
Well, I'd love to write a book about, just vanity publishing, really, but I'd like to write, because obviously, I had quite an interesting sort of life, and I'd like to write a book, just write it for my children as much as anything else. But I don't have time, because people keep giving me CDs to listen to,
You said, how many CDs did you say unlistened in your house?
Oh, at least 5,000, I'd have thought. And my Radio 1 producer and her glamorous assistant are in the room. I embarrass them by identifying them, but they will confirm that I spend only a true obsessive really could spend as much time listening to new music as I do, but there's no way I can keep up with it. And in fact, the 12-inch single situation has reached the point at which I give away like about 2,000 12-inch singles every 6 months, because not only can I not listen to them all, I've got anywhere to put them. We don't live in a very big house.
And do you, how do you actually, it sounds like a really dumb question, put the show together? Because do you literally trawl through everything yourself? Do you take on board other people's advice? Is it strictly...
No, I do it, the bulk of it myself. I start, as soon as I finish, the Thursday night programme, I usually do at home, which is fantastic. I mean, a kind of dream thing, somebody had told me at some stage I'd be able to do that. I would not have believed them. So I sit there at home, and Sheila brings me glasses of red wine, and she, or whichever child happens to be home at the time, does the emails, and Anita, the producer, will usually be there as well, eating chocolate on the sofa, and but in a kind of constructive way. And but then I'll start the following morning, when I wake up. I have these sort of folder things, lined pads, and I just start putting the following week's programmes together. And as I say, the only way, you have to be faintly obsessive to do it, because otherwise you just go to the pub, But I actually, I like putting the programmes together, and I like doing sort of found programming, So if you've got a session track that's got the same title as some obscure record from the 1950s, I'll trudge out into the shed in the field and retrieve that record and put it in the programme. I quite like the idea of them being something arbitrary.
How do you go about categorising your records, alphabetically or generically, or?
Not generically, alphabetically, basically, except for the vinyl LPs, which are done. I've got a kind of numerical system and a card file, and people say that's very anal, but there's about 25,000 LPs, so you do need to have some kind of system. And
do you ever scream at children or various family members if they start putting things in the wrong places?
No, the only thing that they do is just take them and don't return them. So you can always... they went through a P.J. Harvey period a couple of years ago, appropriately enough, because he seems doing this Thursday night. And I now have no P.J. Harvey records, or very few anyway. But on the other hand, they're going to get them anyway when I drop dead. So.
Are you... would you say you're as happy now as you've been, or is this a good time for John Peel?
Well, obviously I'd like to be, I like doing what I do, and I can cope with being me. I'd like to be thinner and younger and, one or two physical things like that, but basically, reasonably content, I think. And it's great because the emails have really transformed the nature of the programmes in that you now get... instant response from anywhere in the world,
You said that you have the sort of listenership of...
We do, apparently this is so, we have the highest percentage of listeners under the age of 16 on the radio station, which I always say rather flippantly, which, given the fact that I'm old enough to be their grandfather, and in the case of some of the uglier ones, may even be their grandfather, I'm quite pleased with that, really.
Right. Would anybody like to ask John a question? It's going to be quite difficult due to lack of microphones, but... we got one.
Hello.
Brilliant.
Which has been your most memorable Glastonbury, and why?
God. Well, I didn't go... I went to the very first one, although... what's his name who runs it? This is what happens.
Michael Eavis.
That's the one. He tells me that I wasn't at the first one. I don't know how he knows this, but I think I was. But then I've been to about the last 8 or 9, and obviously the two kind of rain-soaked ones were memorable in their unspeakable awfulness.
Are you a festival man by nature anyway, or a live concert man?
Well, I went to loads of festivals back in the late 60s when they were a lot less organised. I went to a lot of them as compere and never got paid. It was one of the things that you got used to, was not getting paid. But some of those were just terrible. And there were 2 festivals at Buxton in Derbyshire at the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s, which beat anything for awfulness. But I suppose the best Glastonbury I went to was because I always stay on the site because and as payment I always get tickets for my children and their unsuitable maids. And then, although they're all older, I mean not older obviously, but they're all more capable than I am, I always feel that it's my obligation to stick around in case they need something. Although what that might be, I don't know. But so I always stay close by them. And so it's quite nice having them all around. So I usually get put in a kind of rickety old caravan. And in fact, my caravan's been upgraded the last couple of years. Before that, I was in kind of decommissioned caravans without stabilisers. And another one of the things you discover if you're a man, and once you reach a certain age, you have to get up in the middle of the night for a pee. And I would cross the axis of the caravan on my way to the door, and the whole caravan would tip forward like this. And when you're barely awake and desperate for a pee, it's not a happy thing. Anyway, but there was the first one I went to out of that 8 or 9 was with Andy Kershaw, who's a man whose programmes I very much miss, and his girlfriend, who's wonderful as well. And we found a kind of place. It was the back of some clothing place, and they've got like a little speakeasy going on in there. And you went in, they've got some disgusting Austrian red wine or Hungarian red wine or something, and a lot of dope going around, and they were playing African music, so we just went and sat in there every night, all night, and that was fantastic. Long-winded, not very interesting answer, I'm sorry.
John, you seem to be a sort of constant target by lazy comedians who do impersonations of you of varying quality. Firstly, how does that feel? And secondly, Steve Lamacq, Lamo, as you call him, did an impression of you yesterday, and I was wondering if you wanted to get him back.
Oh, no, certainly not. I can't. The only impression I can do is Bill Shankly, and I have to be fantastically pissed to do that. So you're not going to hear that. But Mike Reid, actually, the famous Mike Reid, former Radio 1 DJ, used to do impressions of me, and I'd have to be told when he was doing me. So is he doing me now? No. Is he doing? Yeah, that's it. You know, so I don't know.
You remember this stuff on about your birthday on TV?
Yeah.
Did that have any effect on the room tidying qualities of your son? Because you went to great lengths about it.
I'll tell you what happened there. I don't know if, obviously, most of you won't have seen it, but my son William, who is amazingly like me, and so we know exactly what to do to really wind each other up. And his bedrooms, like a lot of people's bedrooms, I mean, other kids' bedrooms are untidy, but William's really was something special. And then if anybody saw it accidentally, because obviously I didn't take people by to look at it, that would have been an invasion of his privacy. But people who saw it would say, actually, that is a bit special. I mean, they really were. It is just astonishing, because the kind of corners of the walls were kind of filled up with soiled tissues, which are kind of solidified, you know, and there'd be bits of pizza and old cups and mugs, and just, I mean, it was unspeakable. But that was the way he liked it, and I was just worried that some kind of infestation or plague would break out, you know, and it would take us all. It'd all become hospitalised. Anyway, but I was talking about this with the producer of the programme who'd come down to do something for me, 60th birthday, and he'd got children as well, so we were sitting talking about it. I knew the cameras were running. I could pretend I didn't know what was going on, but we were having a discussion, and and I was a bit pissed, and perhaps exaggerating things a little bit. And but then they made the programme up by taking out all of his stuff and just turning it into like a 20-minute rant about William's bedroom. So we were watching it at home, and I was watching him, and I could tell he wasn't going down terribly well. And, I was genuinely trying to work out some kind of, because I've always had problems in working out kind of my relationship with my dad, like people did, because when he died, before I really got to know him, I mean, I was 28, but I'd been in boarding school and in America and in the army and stuff. Didn't know, and I was kind of looking forward to getting to know him, and then he died. I didn't, so I've been sort of not hung up on this, but it's been something which has been bothering me ever since. So I was trying to resolve this and then, bring in my relationship with William. So it was a serious intent behind it, but it looked like a rant against his bedroom. And he was just sitting there watching it, and then about after a quarter of an hour, I just turned to him and said, "You bastard." And he didn't speak to me for about a week, 10 days, but we're okay again now.
Do you have any funny stories about Joy Division on your order?
I don't think anybody in the world has got any funny stories. I met Ian Curtis once when he gave me 2 copies. It was at a Fall gig, oddly enough, and he gave me 2 copies of that single that was on that Sordid Sentimental label. But we didn't, it was too loud. And also Mark didn't approve of people speaking while he was playing. Because it was that gig where he jumped, there was a couple of people talking and he jumped off the stage and battered them both. They weren't listening to him. So I know is the answer to that.
I mean, do you even have a favourite band?
Well, I suppose because they've been going for so long, it would have to be the Fall. But there have been other bands, obviously, that... I mean, the Faces gave Sheila and myself immense pleasure over the years. And obviously the Undertones for their brief life. But there was a band I used to know in California called The Misunderstood, who made a couple of astonishing singles. They still sound amazing. And they've got a steel guitar player. And I think the steel guitar is, apparently it's extremely difficult to play, but is a much underused instrument because you can get such great noises out of it, even if you can't play it. I wish I could, I wish I owned one. I could just sit there and get noises because it makes fantastic noises. And so if I could play any instrument, it would be steel guitar, I think. And probably with The Misunderstood because it was just such raging stuff that they used to do.
Do you regret at all inflicting that awful Cuban Boys record on us?
What a strange little man. No, not at all, no. Because the thing is that just because I really like it and I like the stuff that they do, and it's I like their kind of approach to what they do, and I even rather like the fact that people disapprove of it, to be honest. Because in the past, when people have... when I've started playing something that people didn't like and they've written me letters saying, you must not play this or you shouldn't play it, it encourages me to play more of it, I must admit, in a rather perverse way. So, I just like them, really, as people. I mean, I don't know them terribly well, but they make me laugh, and their records make me laugh as well. I think.
Are you kind of aware when you're putting together a show like, oh, this will get them, i.e. you'll play something that's really, that will provoke some sort of reaction?
Not really. I mean, you kind of hope that you'll get some sort of response. But it's one of the strangest things was last year where we played 3 or 4 records associated with each year of the previous century, and its working title was the P-lennium, and because we couldn't think of anything else, we got stuck with the P-lennium, Egomania. And but the early records in that, enchanted by them and amazed by them because they sort of never assumed the records really existed in any meaningful form prior to their own lifetimes. And people were, so I like it. I've got a huge collection of terrible old 78s, and my wife introduces one in each program at the moment. So I quite like that. I just like people who are interested. I like the fact that most of the people who seem to listen quite like the idea of hearing something that they might not hear anywhere else.
Well,
have I talked you all to a standstill yet?
How did you come to do Home Truths, and what do you enjoy about it that you don't get from playing records on Radio 1?
That's a difficult question to answer, that. I was originally, it came about because a couple of middle-classy women from Radio 4 asked me if I would do a magazine programme, and I was enormously flattered by this because Radio 4 is seen as the kind of, the flagship network of BBC Radio. And so I thought, well, I'll do this. And we did a pilot, and at one stage, it didn't work at all well. At one stage, I found myself talking to a couple of rather hard-nosed feminist authors about the state of the novel in English, about which I'm ashamed to say I know absolutely nothing at all. So there's a lot of bluffing my way in various things. And quite rightly, it was turned down by the people who make these decisions. Unfortunately, the 2 women then re-edited it and submitted it again, and it was accepted. So I did a program that's called Offspring, which used to run for kind of 8 weeks at a time, and then there'd be 16 weeks or something when it didn't, and so it just came up every once in a while. But then when they made the big changes at Radio 4, because this programme had won a Sony award, they asked me if I would have a go at doing Saturday morning. And I used to hate, this is the wrong place to say this, I used to hate, if you ever listened to Radio 4 on a Saturday morning 4 or 5 years ago, it was Cliff Morgan talking to various sports heroes. And they were incredibly kind of what's the word I'm looking for? I mean, they were rather creepy, you know. And,
bit like this one, yeah.
Bit like, yeah, exactly. But, you know, there was never any... never say, well, why did you do that? It was always kind of accepting of the virtue of everything that these people had done. But it had the most appalling theme music. It used to go, there's something that went diddle 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 like that. And I thought, it used to really piss me off on a Saturday morning, because contrary to what you might imagine, I don't spend the whole time listening to Radio 1. And this thing, I thought, when they said Saturday morning, I thought, if I do that, you think, what a superficial guy. I'm happy to be thought of as superficial. I thought, if I do that programme, I'll never have to listen to that theme tune again. So that was one of the reasons for doing it. But it is quite hard work, and it's actually quite stressful in a way, because you're having to talk some of the time to people who've had sort of grisly experiences of one sort or another, and trying to do that in an unsentimental way can be, you know, it's quite taxing, I think.
Right. Well, I think we can... Oh, hello.
Oh, no, I'm not giving any of those, no.
So, yeah.
No, it's the demo tapes from the Goat Men of Doncaster that you get.
Yes. Well, at that point, thank you very much to John Peel. I think he deserves a round of applause.